Good evening, everyone. My name is Fabio Petito. I'm part of the academic committee of this event and organizations. I'm here to chair the event, and first of all, I'd like to call His Excellency Count Riccardo Paternò di Montecurpo, the Grand Chancellor of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, for an institutional greeting. Please.
Questo posso dare a lei. Insomma, fai, pronto? Excellencies, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to welcome you to the Villa Magistrale, one of the historic and prestigious seats of the Sovereign Order of Malta. I am particularly pleased to address such a distinguished audience on the occasion of this round table entitled The Societal Value of Religion Freedom, an Integral Human Development Approach. We are especially grateful for the collaboration with the Atlantic Council. Its recent report, Changing the Conversation about Religious Freedom, offers a timely and insightful contribution to the international debate. We value this partnership and look forward to nurturing it in the years to come. Tonight's panel, which followed today's conference at Notre Dame University, continues our joint effort together with the Atlantic Council and other partners to reaffirm religious freedom not only as a fundamental right, but a central pillar of human dignity. This theme lies at the very heart of the Order mission and history. Religious freedom is both an individual right and a general value that protects the conscience and promotes the cohesion of society. Indeed, as the report rightly states, religious freedom is a source of motivation, of identity, of peace. It enables people to act according to conscience, which is the foundation of the true civic responsibility. Where it is respected, societies thrive. Where it is denied, conflicts arise. Allow me to also underline a fundamental truth. Interreligious dialogue is not a dilution of faith, but a deepening of respect. It enables us to listen without fear and to build without compromise. It reminds us that conviction and coexistence can and must work together. But words must always be followed by action. The Sovereign Order of Malta does not merely advocate for religious freedom, it practices it every day in the most challenging and diverse context. A few months ago, during a visit to Lebanon, I was deeply moved to meet a Lebanese doctor of Shiite faith, wearing the vest of the Order of Malta while serving in one of our mobile clinics in the Bekaa Valley, caring for Syrian refugees. At Holy Family Hospital in Bethlehem, run by the Order, most of the doctors, nurses, and the patients are Muslims. And in Gaza, throughout several months last year, the Order provided food and basic supplies via the Catholic parish of Gaza City to both Christians and Muslims, without any distinction. This is humanitarian service as a duty, and for us, a service in the name of God. The neutrality of our action is not an option, It is a moral principle. We serve the person, not the label, and we do so without asking whom they pray to, but only what they need. We are particularly honored to welcome among us His Excellencies, Monsignor Pacho, representative of the Holy See, whose presence further reminds us that freedom of religious and interreligious dialogue are not abstract ideals. They are a lived reality and a spiritual mission. In conclusion, religious freedom is not merely the right of worship, it is the right to belong, to speak, to serve, and to hope. It is the seed of the peace and the soul of development, and it is the truest test of any civilization, how it frees the conscience of its minorities and how it listens to the voice of the other. For let us never forget that the responsibility we bear is also for the generation to come. If we fail to teach the youth the value of conscience, we risk losing the cornerstone of human dignity. Education and example must work hand in hand. I thank you all for your commitment, and I wish you courage, wisdom, and success in our common endeavor. Thank you very much.
Grand Chancellor, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to organize this important conversation in this stunning place, which we are enjoying very much. Also, the view and everything is amazing. So I want to call the person who is behind this, the director of the Freedom and Prosperity Center of the Atlantic Council, Joseph Lemoine, and I take the opportunity to thank him for making this important conversation possible. Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I am humbled and a little impressed being in front of such a distinguished crowd. But thank you, and thank you for taking the time to, out of your busy lives, to join us in this important conversation that we think is essential, and it really feels like we're building something important here, which makes me feel good, and you should feel good about it as well. So I'm Joseph Lemoine. I worked at the Freedom and Prosperity Center at the Atlantic Council. And I just wanted to bring a little bit of context about how we came up to do this effort in collaboration with the Order of Malta, the Notre Dame University, and this incredible group of scholars. But first, I want to congratulate all the organizers, Scott Appleby, Ambassador Contini, Nina Danawi-Johnson, Michael Drayson, Silvio Ferrari, and of course, Fabio Petito. And especially, I want to thank all those that made this day possible, Francesca, Annie, and everyone else that works in the background that I'm forgetting. And of course, I want to thank Lisa Polina and Michael Fish for sponsoring this event. So 4 years ago, the Atlantic Council took on a simple yet complex question. Is freedom the best way to achieve societal prosperity? And can we test this with data and evidence? And if we can put the slide on the screen, that would be great. And so this question sounds pretty easy at first, but it's not straightforward. I think it's fair to say that most of us, we aspire to be free and prosperous. Yet, in many parts of the world, government leaders argue that freedom may not be the way forward. They argue that controlling their people's liberties, personal, political, economic, religious, is a faster and safer path to wealth and prosperity. So for about 4 years, a dedicated team of scholars at the Atlantic Council went on to tackle this important question. Does freedom lead to prosperity and human flourishing. The first step was to define what it means. What is freedom? What is prosperity? Prosperity is the goal. That's the destination. That's where you want to be, right? It is in itself subjective. Your definition of what it means to be prosperous might be different than my definition. We went on to take a pretty well-accepted definition, looking at growth, GDP per capita, education, health, while also considering some of the shared outputs of prosperity, treatment of minorities, income inequality, and the environment. Then we had to define freedom. This, I believe, is where our work provides the most value. We found that to achieve prosperity, if you look around the world, generally there are three main pillars, three main institutions that countries need to have to be successful: political freedom, economic freedom, and the rule of law. So to demonstrate this, we created this set of country indexes, the Freedom and Prosperity Indexes, that measure this, on one side the state of freedom on those three pillars, and on the other side the state of prosperity across 164 countries and 30 years. That's 100,000 data points. That's like an ocean of information, but that allows us to do some real econometrics and some evidence-based analysis. And we went on to measure the impact of change, so what it means for a society to become more free or less free, and what is the impact on prosperity and on human flourishing. The horizontal line here shows the years. On the far left, on this chart over here, on the far left is when a country makes a change, either towards more freedom or towards less freedom. The vertical axis is the magnitude of the change on prosperity. And you see two clear paths. The green line are those countries that made a positive change towards freedom, and you see that prosperity is going up. The red line is countries that restricted the freedom of their people, and you see that prosperity over time declines. But what you also see is that there is a snowball effect to it. The impact of a restriction or an improvement on freedom today and tomorrow might be very small, but over time that grows into much more. So, okay, freedom delivers, that's great. So why am I talking to you about all of this? So, if you look around the world, since 2012, freedom is declining. If you take the simple average of 164 countries, the number is going down. Here are each color represents a different region in the world. And on the left, you have political freedom. In the center, you have the rule of law. And on the right, you have economic freedom. If a bar goes up, it means an improvement. And if it goes down, it means a decline. And that's over the past 10 years. And you see a clear picture that economic freedom, we're still somewhat progressing, and that's primarily driven by women's economic freedom. But in terms of political freedom and the rule of law, it's a collapse. Anywhere that you look around the world today, we see restriction of political freedoms and the rule of law. So why am I telling you all this? And why are we here discussing about religious freedom? Is because we have this research and we want to be thinking really hard about the real world implication of those findings. What brings us here today is really thinking what it means to be free and how religious freedom can help us achieve human flourishing. Protecting religious freedom is an anchor freedom. To have religious freedom means to have freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom to access knowledge, and other freedoms as well. So to achieve religious freedom is to achieve a broader freedom, and it is, at term, to achieve prosperity and human flourishing. Religious discrimination can limit access to education, healthcare, food, clean water, sanitation, and so on. And the religious minorities are quite often also economically marginalized. Yet, despite these connections that we see in numbers and data, this relationship between religious freedom and human flourishing has remained largely underexplored. And this is where this concept of integral human development comes in as a very elegant and impactful concept to discuss these connections. And today, this morning, this afternoon, and tonight, it is about those connections, right? But the Freedom and Prosperity Center, as you can see, we love numbers and data. So what is the state of religious freedom today? Here, this chart shows the people's ability to choose, change, and practice their faith openly, including the right to share it peacefully without government interference. Each line is a different region. On the left, you see the highest value for any region at any given time. The horizontal axis are the years, and the vertical axis is the change in percentage. You see that since the world has achieved its highest level of religious freedom, in every single region of the world, it's been going down. The levels might be different between those regions, but no matter where you are, it's going down overall. And that decline has been going on from 10 years in North America to 18, 19, 20 years in other regions. So the message is very clear. This anchor freedom, religious freedom, is under pressure. And having this under pressure means that human flourishing and prosperity is under pressure as well. Today, I want us to work together to find solutions, to discuss these concepts, these new approaches, to make it better, to allow people to follow their faith, their belief, and to ultimately allow them to flourish. Thank you all for joining us, and now I'll leave it to the real experts to tell us about what we're discussing today. Thank you.
Well, we are going now to move to the roundtable discussion on the societal value of religious freedom and integral human development approach. I'm going to call the speakers to join me on the stage. Sir Malcolm, and I'll introduce you, so we'll get more time to discuss. Sir Malcolm Evans is principal at the Regent's Park College at the University of Oxford. Sir Malcolm, please. Mohammed El-Sannussi is commissioner at the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom and also executive director of the Network for Religious Traditional Peacemakers. Rita Mussalem is the director for the Center of Interreligious Dialogue of the Focolare Movement. Monsignor Daniel Pacho is the Undersecretary for the Multilateral Sector of the Secretariat of State of the Holy See. And Professor Adam Seligman, Professor of Religion at the Boston University, and founding director of the Community Engaging with Difference and Religions. We have an extraordinary panel. Can I ask you to join me and welcome our panelists? We are convened here with this title, The Societal Value of Religious Freedom and Integral Human Development Approach. I would say just that, as also Joseph has just shown to us with some of the evidence he has collected, it is broadly agreed by many watchdogs and reports that, unfortunately, the freedom of religion or belief environment has been deteriorating globally in the last 10, 15 years. And unfortunately, we see high level of religious discrimination and persecutions in many different parts of the world, many different cultural contexts, many different religious contexts. And this violation, unfortunately, especially in recent years, has occurred and are increasing because of further polarization of politics in many parts of the world, growing levels of social hostility across religious divides, and the emergence of strong forms of religious nationalism in many different parts of the world, including in Europe, in the West, as well as in all the continents of the world. So many experts, including people convened here, many governments, international organizations have recognized this reality. In the last 10, 15 years, have been thinking hard how to respond, to improve this situation. They've developed new tools, new foreign policy roles, special ambassadors on freedom of religion and belief. But unfortunately, the response has been a failure. The situation has been going worse. And so we convened more than 1 year ago with a conference in this place with a view of to try to think a different way of approach these challenges. I mean, and do we perhaps need to change the conversation to move the agenda forward in a positive way? And the report that we are going to discuss tonight, that was published, the Atlantic Council report, has as a title, Changing the Conversation About Religious Freedom. And the crucial thing for us was to think that perhaps we can better deal with this challenge in terms of policy response by looking through the prism of integral human development. Of course, here in Rome, many people are familiar. This is a vision that belongs to the Catholic social doctrine, but also that is shared in its foundation by many cultural, religion, and wisdom traditions. It's a vision which says that development, prosperity requires a focus on human dignity of everyone, each one human being, and provides a way of thinking about development which goes beyond the mere economic side. So the question is, for us, does religious freedom is important because it allows us to really make more visible these societal values of religion and religious freedom if we look it through integral human development. So, and we have this incredibly good panel to address some of these issues. And I probably would like to start our conversation with Sir Malcolm. Sir Malcolm, I think I remember meeting you more than 15 years ago in the British Parliament in Westminster. Yes. And of course you were, at that point, one of the crucial driving forces of what was emerging as, the need in the British political system to take these issues of the protection and promotion of freedom of religion or belief more seriously. I remember you authored this very significant report in which you argued that Article 18, so the article of the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights on Freedom of Religion and Belief, was an orphaned right. Yes. So I want to ask you, how do you see the situation today after these 15 years? Do you think it's still an orphaned right? How do you see the trends of freedom of religion violations globally?
Well, thank you, and great pleasure to be here. Any metaphor derived from family relationships can arguably be fraught. Anyhow, we picked on the title of an orphaned right for that report, really to try to highlight, as the report did, the extent to which one could say that the freedom of religion and belief as a human right, and in the light of other conversations today, it is important to stress that, how it has developed in the international human rights world has distanced itself or lost its connection with the family of which it was originally designed to be a part. And to that extent, has anything changed? I really don't think it has. The point that we were trying to emphasize those years ago was, whilst freedom of religion and belief was in many ways one of the foundational human rights, when the what has since become the canon of human rights were being put forward, the development that is had within that has been very slim, to put it mildly. And if I hesitate with the orphan metaphor, it is simply because in many ways it's not a question of being orphaned by its parent, it's almost being abandoned by its child. Because if you look back to some of the foundational documents that actually led to the to the establishment of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, for example. Look back to those, the Atlantic Charter, the United Nations Declaration on United Nations in the 1940s. They highlighted a number of foundational concerns that a new world order needed to address, and they included speech, they included freedom of religion, freedom of worship, later translated into freedom of religion, freedom from want, freedom from fear, and human rights and fundamental freedoms. So in other words, it was being given an enhanced status as one of the foundational needs of the international community that it should be looking to support. And yet, although well represented within the Universal Declaration and the initial statements of international law, its normative development has been thin, to say the least. Unlike other well-established rights, it has not matured into a legally binding convention. It has still been, if you like, left behind. And if it has been left behind in that formal structural development in very large part, it has certainly, until recently, been very much left behind in terms of the normative work of the differing UN human rights treaty bodies, within regional courts, etc., etc. And so, for some reason, despite its founding place and its inspirational place in what led to, let us call it, the modern legal human rights movement, it has never sat comfortably within it and has been kept as a distance. And indeed, the idea that we have then developed in a subsequent report was to describe it almost as the residual right, the right that you can have when everything else has been dealt with. And so that pattern has not really changed. But it is worth saying, I think, at this moment, that that report, as you rightly said, the first of a British all-party parliamentary group, in a sense was part of an attempt to change the conversation even then, because the conversation about the content of the right had very much been led in international fora, international organisations, by government state representatives, and this was an attempt to tap into what you could, if you like, to parliamentarians who were receiving more and more concerns in their post about questions of violations of freedom of religion and belief. And so there was a moment where other channels within the political process were opening up and receptive to these. And that itself has helped foster, as you mentioned a moment ago, the increasing focus on special envoys that has been brought into place, new platforms of parliamentarians, international parliamentary platforms. And so it has broadened the range of actors within, let us call it, the political space around freedom of religion and belief. There has not yet really been a particular response at that higher level. So to that extent, there is a much more interest around the freedom of religion and belief, but it's yet to find reflection in, if you like, the heartlands of human rights institutional development.
Okay, no, thank you. This is very interesting. So the increase of tools and coordination among government and the global advocacy of which has increased, but unfortunately, we have seen that this hasn't had a huge effect in terms of improving the situation. And I want to turn here to Professor Seligman. You have studied for many decades the issue of how religious identities and difference is playing in our global world, and you have been warning that we need to step up, that the situation is in some way worrying, concerning. How do you see, in the light also of the report, the global crisis of religious freedom as part of this predicament that you have been studying for so long?
Let me at least try to answer or relate to the first part of your question. If you ask the grandparents of anybody in this room what their identity was, they'd have no idea what you were talking about. Right? For many of us, if you asked our parents what their identity was, it wouldn't compute. They would tell you, we did this, we didn't do this, we ate this, we did during Lent, we didn't eat, and it'll be different for a Catholic and an Orthodox, and so and so. They would give you, if they were open to the discussion, a list of practices and things that they did or didn't do. Identity is an abstraction from those practices, whether we call it Catholic or Jewish or Sikh or Pentecostal or what have you. So if we're on the level of practices, I think it's important to remind us of a term that's part of this discussion, which is tolerance. Tolerance of alternative practices, of practices you don't agree with, of practices that you might think are sinful, probably heretical, maybe that will earn you a place in hell. And how do we live with those practices? And remember that in canon law, there were two classes of people in the Middle Ages who were officially legally tolerated, and those were prostitutes and Jews. Because if you got rid of society, if you got rid of them, society would be so much worse. But we had to tolerate them. In other words, we had to be uncomfortable with them. And the cognate of toler is soffrir. This is the cognate term. And we still use that term, at least in English. He tolerated the fever very well, or so on. So I think essential to any religious freedom is the ability to live together with what you disagree with and be uncomfortable with that. And I believe that that ability is declining. I believe that traditional societies all over the world were more adept at that. We're more adept at living in an ambiguous space between what I think is right and what you think is right. In the modern world, and more so, and I think the cell phones are contributing to it, we espouse sheer and clear boundaries. And sheer and clear boundaries have very, very narrow margins. And I think the realm of freedom, the realm of expression, is often to be found on the boundaries. And as I say, we're making them thinner and thinner, sheerer and sheerer, and hence less accommodating.
Thank you. That's an interesting way. We tend to think the other way around. So thanks. That's very interesting. I want to turn to Monsignor Pacho. Monsignor Pacho, from that unique observatory, if you allow me to say, that is the Holy See, this global network which is also local because of the presence of the Catholic Church over. How do you see the global situation of these human rights, freedom of religion or belief, that also with the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church has made an important human rights. How do you see the situation of these human rights? Do you see the need to change in some way the conversation on religious freedom, as the report suggests?
Well, thank you, first of all, and thanks to the organizers to include me among these experts. Freedom of religion and belief is of unique importance to the Holy See. As you are aware, the Holy See establishes diplomatic relations with states and participates in the activities of the international organizations. Its mission there is always to protect the libertas ecclesiae, thereby enabling the Church to fulfill the mission entrusted to it by Christ, while also promoting Christian anthropology and the dignity of man who is created in the image and likeness of God. These two fundamental elements of the Holy See's diplomatic activities are uniquely combined in freedom of religion and belief. This is essential for the Church to preach the gospel, gather its believers, and provide an education based on Christian values. And at the same time, freedom of religion and belief coincides with and is a prerequisite for Christian anthropology, which recognizes human beings with a body and a soul, and therefore respects their transcendent dimension. And this dimension requires people to be free to confess and live their faith, regardless of the religion they hold. In addition, freedom of religion and belief stems from the concepts of Christian freedom and faith. Let me explain that. Christian freedom is defined not only as negative liberty, freedom from sin, from the law's condemnation, from the constraints and ties of the past, and from interference or constraints, intolerance or persecution. But Christian freedom includes also positive liberty. In fact, it encompasses, with a positive approach, the freedom to think, to speak, and to act autonomously, to realize one's purposes independently, and finally to believe and to be able to live the faith both in private and in public. It is important to bear in mind that the Christian understanding of belief is unique. You cannot become a Christian through blood or birth, by observing the commandments or by performing religious rites. Baptism requires an act of faith, actus fidei, which necessitates freedom because it involves trust, acceptance, and love. Credere cor dare. Furthermore, no religion's primary commandment is to love, which can only be achieved through a freely made decision. Yesterday, Pope Leo XIV, addressing the papal representatives, said, I quote, "Church is always ready for everything out of love, that she is always on the side of the last, the poor, and that she will always defend the sacrosanct right to believe in God. To believe that this life is not at the mercy of the powers of this world, but rather is traversed by a mysterious meaning." Coming to your question, the Holy See, through its global diplomatic presence and engagement with religious communities, observes that freedom of religion and belief remains under significant strain worldwide. So we agree that we need to change the needs. We need to give priority and importance to religious freedom, and we need to use all our possibilities we have to raise awareness for it.
Thank you, Monsignor. Rita Musalem, you are a practitioner of interreligious dialogue. You have, as part of the Focolare movements, many different communities that engage all over the world in dialogue and constructing unity across religious divides. I want to ask you, we have invited you on a conference on religious freedom. How do you see this link between religious freedom, the protection of religious minority, and interreligious dialogue? Because this is one theme that in the report came over and over again, that we need also interreligious dialogue to defend religious freedom. What do you think about that?
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. So I think that religious freedom and interreligious dialogue can be considered two sides of the same coin. There can be no meaningful dialogue without freedom in all levels. Interreligious dialogue can only flourish where the right to religious freedom is respected. But At the same time, such dialogue can promote and strengthen religious freedom, contributing to the common good. I like the holistic vision proposed in the report, and I think that it's essential because as it begins with the fundamental and non-negotiable recognition of human dignity and responsibility, regardless of religious or cultural background. In this way, religious freedom becomes a freedom to contribute together, actors of various religions, to the common good and peace. Unfortunately, we know that in some contexts, this principle fails, and religious minorities are often discriminated against, persecuted, denied their fundamental rights. It's enough to look around us. So the question is, what kind of dialogue can arise from fear, from distrust, from injustice, and lack of freedom? But how can we break this cycle of inequality, discrimination, polarization, and hatred without the daring to engage in dialogue, even when it seems difficult and useless? This is where I see important role beyond the international pressure that I think that is important, the important role of bottom-up strategies. So to work at the grassroots level. We need, I think, to promote and support the dialogue of life, of encounter that demands listening, welcoming, recognizing and respecting the dignity and the richness of every person. Naturally, this requires education to dialogue, and it's not enough to transmit knowledge. It's important, but it's not enough. We need to inform mindsets and behaviors, fostering awareness and practical skills. It's also important to create, I call it, safe spaces where people can meet and share their lived experiences, their suffering, their fears, and their hopes, breaking down the walls of mistrust and ignorance, and finding together the ways to work for the common good and for peace. So we need to foster a culture of trust, of encounter. Finally, allow me to say that I can witness that the most disarming force in dialogue is love. A practical, patient, genuine love capable of emptiness, of losing, of being uncomfortable. When this love is shared across religious boundary, it reveals who in reality we are. In our diversity, we are one human family, journeying together, facing the same challenging, and striving for a more dignified life and peace. Yeah.
Thank you, Rita, thank you. Mohammed, you wear many different hats, and as, of course, commissioners of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, you have been very much involved in the debates on the policy level of freedom of religion or belief globally, but also as a director of Peacemakers Network, you have been engaged in some of the most troubled countries all over the world where conflict and poverty are unfortunately the reality. And I want to ask you here, because one of the findings of our report is that religious freedom is something important in relation to sustainable development and to as a way of thinking development and global development challenges nowadays. What can you say about these insights of the report?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much, my friend and brother Fabio, for your leadership. Fabio is the engine behind this effort, so we appreciate that. And of course, My gratitude also goes to the Sovereign Military Order of Malta for hosting us. We appreciate that. And of course, my gratitude goes to you, Joseph, for the Atlantic Council in this critical partnership. Now, the report. As this report dives into integral human development, we are reminded this is not just an academic or philosophical framework. Rather, it provides practical guidance that when implemented, we can foster deeper human connections and foster social cohesion by seeing our communities as relational beings. So integral human development can be the foundation in ensuring freedom and prosperity for all. However, the success of this newly envisioned platform, integral human development, is dependent on how to advance the ability for individuals and communities to freely practice religion or belief, or their choosing, or to choose none at all. So this right is not only for a person's individual's liberty, but it also directly impacts a society's ability to thrive socially and economically as well. So we know that the consequences that happened when this foundational freedom is denied, communities can face a number of problems: increased discriminations, marginalizations, and social exclusion, often leading to instability and violence. In the contrast, to answer your question directly, when religious freedom is protected, individuals can bring their full richness of identity to contribute to the beauty and strength in diversity, which in turn is strengthening development. When we take a closer look at the theology of nearly every religious and faith tradition, we recognize the key element that link them together. We see commonalities in how religious traditions offer a roadmap of shared virtues. I'm choosing the word carefully, shared virtues, which teaches its followers on how human beings should act towards one another, centered in ideals of respect, diversity, mutual respect, diversity, and mutual understanding. So promoting religious freedom allows these traditions to contribute to the public good, reinforcing shared values and virtues that support peaceful and inclusive societies. We saw that in the speech when the late Holy Father, Pope Francis, in 2017, he spoke about what integral human development look like, affirming that it must include the whole person, both spiritually and physically. That's the words from the Holy Father. He explained, and I'm quoting, development does not consist in having the regulations of more and more goods for just a material well-being. Integrating body and soul also means that no development work can really achieve its purpose if it does not respect the place when God is present to us and speaks to our hearts. Closing the quote from the Holy Father. So the quote captures why religious freedom is essential. If development efforts ignore the spiritual lives of people, including the right to freely worship or not, then these efforts will fall short, ultimately disconnecting it from very people it's trying to serve. So religious freedom only bolsters the efficiency of development work, allowing it to become more holistic, contextually relevant, and sustainable religious freedom is too important. Sustainable religious freedom is too important to be misinterpreted or surrounded by suspicions. Therefore, today, with the rise of polarization, it is critical for us as we gather here to embrace inclusive framework like the integral human development, to advance religious freedom, among other elements of human flourishing. Using IHD as a framing tool allows advocates to promote the core principles of religious freedom, such as dignity, conscience, inclusion, and agency without necessarily invoking the term religious freedom, which can be politically sensitive in some of the contexts around the world. So I will be remiss here if I did not also emphasize the critical point of the inclusion of women and youth within integral human dignity. When freedom of religion or belief is respected, it creates spaces for diverse inclusion, including that of women and youth. Their participation is often hindered, not by structural barriers and social norms that can be challenged when freedom of belief and conscience are upheld. By promoting integral human development as a new approach for human flourishing and upholding the dignity of all people, societies can create more inclusive spaces where women and youth are not only present, but empowered to lead, contribute, and shape their communities. So the report notes that clear link that religious freedom and gender equality, and particularly SDG 5, are interlocking together. So,
Mohammed, this is extremely interesting also because, and that allows me, because it must be said that the United States has been leading on the international religious freedom agenda for many years. And the report also suggests that at some point there are predominant naming and shaming kind of approach on naming countries of particular concern. In some way, has become part of the problem. You seem to be acknowledging this.
So Fabio, I mean, you don't need to speak there, right?
No, I know that you have been agreeing. But I want to ask Sir Malcolm Emmons if you agree with this part of the analysis and recommendation of the report. The naming and shaming, top-down advocacy, has shown its limit. We need to move to much more bottom-up approaches, which involve also religious actors as important stakeholder and participant in this conversation to improve local freedom of religion environment. What do you think about this?
How long have you got? 4 minutes, I know. I believe passionately in this. I was for 10 years chair of a United Nations Committee on Torture Prevention. And this was unlike any of the other UN human rights mechanisms. I had worked for many years to try to get it into existence and then was privileged to have the opportunity of leading it for that length of time. Whereas every other UN process is ultimately built on, you could call it naming and shaming, or at least reporting committees in Geneva in the public space, looking at what they do and commenting on it. What did we do? We did precisely the opposite. We had a remarkable mandate, which meant that we could go to any country which was a state party without any notice, and we did, with the right to go into any place of detention that we wanted to go to, which we did, to speak to anybody and see anything, which we did. How did states give us the mandate to do that? There was a quid pro quo that meant that many in the human rights world thought that what was the point of this? It was nonsense. And that was all our work was confidential. The entire point was that we were able to go into places physically ourselves, which nobody else was going to get access to. And I can assure you, I did go into a fair number of places that no other human rights monitor would get access to, and able to speak absolutely one-to-one with the people who were being the victims of violation, who were at risk of being victims of violation, hear directly from them what they considered to be the most pressing concerns and worries that they have, which I can absolutely assure you were very often absolutely not what you were expecting to hear. Or the things which the normal human rights canon and approaches would suggest were necessary. But then on the basis of this, we would enter into wholly confidential dialogue with the states concerned. And I can absolutely tell you in this room that whereas if we had made many of these reports public, what would have happened is that the state would have denied them. They would have accused us of bias, of X, Y, and Z, because this is just the standard way that these things happen. There is not one, no, maybe one, single instance in the 10 years I did this that I can think of where I went in to have a robust conversation with those in authority about what was going on, that somebody denied the truth of what I said.
You know,
And, yeah.
can I substantiate that with a specific example? I mean, naming and shaming. I mean, this is the first time I hear you talking about that and this bottom-up approach. And this brings me to the critical role of civil society and religious actors. In January 24 of last year, I was not in my, I wasn't appointed as a commissioner at that time. We went with a couple of evangelicals to visit Uzbekistan to look into religious freedom. We visited Bukhara. We met with the religious communities, and we met with a Baptist pastor. The meeting with the Baptist pastor was in a community center. We were meeting, I asked the pastor, tomorrow is Sunday, can we visit you and attend the worship in your church? I'm just trying to assess the state of religious freedom. He said, my church is not ready. I said, why? He said, it's not ready. We have some problems. So, but I said to him, how you deal with your congregations or where your, the Baptist community in Bukhara, particularly the elderly, those who need more spirituality. He said, I visit them in their homes. So I told him, Pastor, have you heard that Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he was visited by the Christian of Najran, he gave them a part of the mosque to pray. He said, no, I never heard about this. I said, what about I talk to the Imam of Bukhara and providing you space to pray until your church is actually renovated? He said, oh, wow, this is something else. Now I took the matter. Our ambassador in Uzbekistan hosted a dinner for us, and he brought the foreign minister, advisors to the president of Uzbekistan, and I told them the story. Told them, these groups in Bukhara, I would like to see if you as a government provide them space and talk to the mufti to pray. They said, well, we're gonna look into this. The point I'm making, we're not naming and shaming, we're going on the ground, talking to these people, empowering religious minorities. A few months later, the advisor to President, Mr. Kamilov, came to Washington and met with us in my personal official capacity, the commission, with pictures of the church when it was damaged and how the government is able to restore it. Naming and shaming is not working. It's not going to empower those numerical minorities on the ground.
Okay. Yes. Mark.
Yeah, and building on that, in our work, we never We certainly said if we thought that there was evidence of ill treatment, torture taking place, but it was never in naming and shaming. The purpose of the exercise was to get the people on side with you. At the end of the day, in a prison setting, the people you need to convince are the people who are running institutions. If things are going to get better, you have to work with them, not against them. You're not going to be there forever. You have a short period of time.
Yeah.
You need to win their trust, you need to win their confidence, and you need to be able to work proactively with them, making most of these people are not monsters. Some are.
But human beings.
Most of them aren't. And they actually, if they feel that they are not being attacked by you, but working with you, you can make good progress. But the key to that is to recommend things and to suggest things that are practical, that they actually feel they can do, rather than so often in the human rights world tell people what frankly is not feasible and impractical. And this way you can enter into a different type of constructive dialogue rather than the so-called constructive dialogues which take place in UN circles, which are not a dialogue and rarely constructive. This is, I think, a way forward, but it's rooted in the local, it's rooted with working with the people who were affected, and then with those who are in a position to help, bringing them together. But confidentiality to build confidence can be a very important part of that. I'm not saying there should never be any naming and shaming. For some, at some times, frankly, that's all that you can do, and do it you must. But to do it with those who you will then alienate rather than build the relationships that you can make positive developments from, I think is a trick lost. And there is real scope, I think, within the movements focusing on freedom of religion and belief and religious freedom, given our dialogical instincts, to be able to take these tools and develop them in a way that is really empowering and can really take the conversation forward.
That's very interesting. Adam, Professor Seligman, I want to turn to you because I know that from being an academic, you developed an incredible kind of organization, the CEDR, the Communities for Engaging Difference and Religions. And you operated in many different contexts locally to try exactly to find a way to improve living in diversity in our modern world. I mean, do you connect with these sort of comments that have just been done about working locally and contextually, dialogically? What can you tell us about your experience about that?
The one-word answer is yes, of course. I don't work at that level. We work at the level of how people live their lives, not governments, not people in detention, but relations between, I don't know, Catholics and Protestants in Kupang, in West Timor, where Protestants have gone in to get communion because they thought there was something magical and special in communion, were denied. Riots broke out and people were killed. That's the level that we're dealing with. Rita and Monsignor Pacho talked of trust, mentioned trust. Trust is very, very fragile, very fragile. It takes a long time to build, and it breaks easily. And if it can ever be reconstituted after it's broken, to me isn't clear. I make a distinction between trust and confidence. Trust in the sense you very much meant it, Monsignor. Confidence is when I know what to expect, when I can make predictions. Trust is what I need to maintain relationships if I cannot make predictions. There's a whole library around this. So we found over 25 years of activity in different parts of the world and establishing centers in East Africa, in Uganda, and Kenya, working for years now in the university in Hiroshima, that what's important, I'm really validating a lot of what Rita said, is what's critical is doing things together. You said it better, experiencing together. And we can experience things together and draw very different meanings from what we experienced. We're all there in the same place at the same time, experiencing the same event, and yet it'll mean something different to you and to me. So one of the things that we learned that's critical is to reflect together on the experience. And if you do this over a fortnight, over a period of 2 weeks, again and again and again, it's as if you're building, Christina used the image of a quilt earlier today. It's as if you're building a quilt that in the end can hold you. I think that iteration is critical, not coming in and doing something, but iteration, because one of the strongest ties between people is a shared past. So if we've walked a certain road together and we share a past together, despite all our differences of belief, of religion, of interests, of whatever, we have that shared past, and that's very strong. It's a very strong way of allowing us to, forcing us, because we want to preserve that road. We want to preserve and lengthen that shared past of working despite our differences. And so one of the things that we've stressed again and again and again is that difference involves discomfort, and as I intimated earlier, we have to learn to live with discomfort, to accept not being comfortable. One of the ways that we live, that we generally, in day-to-day life, that we live with the other, is we assimilate her or him into our own categories. That's not really living with. That's not accepting difference in its difference. That's translating it into something that I'm comfortable with. The real challenge is to be able to put a bracket, a parenthesis around my own categories and try to enter into the categories of somebody else. Even temporarily, I said a bracket. Not to become the other, but to at least temporarily have that empathy, another word that you used, to imagine the other. Now, what usually happens is if we have a prejudice, and we all have prejudices, against a particular group of people, and we meet somebody from that group who challenges those prejudices, we'll say he or she is the exception. Yes, look, I know all Muslims are terrorists, but Mustafa went to Boston College, so he's different. He's not representative because he's different, because of his experience in Boston College. So we'll preserve our categories. We'll do everything to preserve our categories, which is a fancy way of saying to preserve our prejudices. But the real trick is to get beyond that. So this is the type of very, very intensive, long-term, hard local work that we've been doing for a quarter of a century.
Thank you. And Monsignor Paggio, one of the main messages of the report is to think a little bit outside of the box. We are suggesting that this concept of integral human development may be added to the toolkit to protect and promote also this important right of religious freedom. And I'm turning to you because I know also in the Holy See you have a structure in which integral human development is managed by a different dicastery of the Secretariat of State, which deals with religious freedom. Do you think there is something in this idea that maybe integral human development can help also in protecting, promoting religious freedom from the Holy See perspective?
You're looking for a short answer?
And a long answer.
Yes.
Yes. Good.
Yes, of course. No, the Holy See promotes integral human development since, just quote Paul VI, Populorum Progressio. More than sustainable development, we promote transcendental and social element. So integral human development emphasizes holistic growth of the person, spiritual, social, economic, rooted in the God-given dignity and community. So sustainable development focuses on meeting present needs without compromising future generations, prioritizing environmental, economic, and social balance. But integral human development provides a robust framework for advancing freedom of religion and belief by addressing the interconnected challenge of poverty, discrimination, conflict, environmental degradation, which often undermine religious freedom. The vision of integral human development offers a powerful tool and framework for mobilizing policies to improve freedom of religion and belief globally. So my answer is yes.
Great. And Rita, and I want to ask you, do you have any stories, examples of experience that your communities have that speaks to this agenda? Because I think it's also about changing the narrative, changing the conversation, and also making visible that other stories and other experiences are possible. Perhaps, do you have anything that you think speaks to this agenda you want to share with us?
I think that each one here present have a lot of examples, inspiring examples. I will tell something. I like this story in Slovenia. A long-standing friendship with Turkish Muslim families and Slovenian families, Christian, built through years of concrete support and exchange, led to the launch of an initiative. They called it Deflate the Bubbles, Break the Bubbles. And that aims to break down prejudices, stereotypes, and to foster meaningful encounters between Muslim and Christian families. And so when they began this, they saw that they have many shared values like family, active citizenship, intercultural dialogue, democracy, freedom, inclusion, and also inspiring joint acts of solidarity, such as supporting Ukrainian refugees, as example. And to respond to the challenges faced by youth, the project launched an innovative initiative called the Hard Topics App. This app fosters dialogue between people, especially young people, with opposing views by matching users based on contrasting answers to polarizing questions. So it encourages respectful exchange in a guided environment and will be soon introduced in high schools and university in Ljubljana. Another example, in September of last year, during the war between Hezbollah and Israel, and as the airstrikes intensified in southern Lebanon, and people were forced to flee, 130 Shiite Muslims were looking for a place. So they were welcomed at our center of the Focolare, located in a safer Christian area. But it was a risk. So despite that risk, it posed to the host community, the desire of dialogue for dialogue and peace prevailed. And what followed was a powerful experience of solidarity that engaged the entire village, Christian village. So for 66 days, food, clothing, medical care, education for children were provided. In a time where religions are often portrayed by media as sources of conflict and division, this lived experience tells a different story. People from different faiths becoming true artisans of unity, fostering healing, fraternity, and social cohesion, and demonstrate the true image of the country. Another small example, in Yangon, Myanmar, so I'll take you in Asia, in a very complex and difficult context, two women decided to open like an institution for vulnerable and differently abled children, founded on the principle of dialogue and inclusion. Despite the country's Buddhist majority, these schools welcomes families from diverse religions and social backgrounds, promotes a culture of fraternity through daily acts of kindness and awareness, and nurturing an inclusion and compassionate society. Over time, this spirit of inclusion has built a strong, supportive community of teachers, parents, and students, one that now extends beyond the school to other special education centers with the same mission. So it's like, when we draw in the sea something and then grow, because people need peace and people are waiting like a door to open and to give, to be all of us builders of peace, of inclusion, of freedom.
Thank you, Rita. Because I know that also Monsignor Pacho will need to leave soon because the Pope has convened a meeting to which I understand you need to go. And so, but I don't want to give an impression that the Holy See representative doesn't take any question from the audience. So I want to open and give me just the 10 minutes and I'll let you go. So is there any question from the audience in general? And then I'll give the floor, of course, first to Monsignor Pacho, who will have to leave. Yes, I have the gentleman there and the gentleman there. Can you please have a mic there? I'll collect. Please mention your affiliation and a short question, please.
All right. My name is Halil. I'm a doctoral student at Georgetown University. I have two mini questions. One is to Sir Malcolm. I was just wondering how you, like as an institution or like as a group, to investigate those atrocities, could trust them in the first place when they have proven themselves to have committed the atrocities, and what were some of the progress you have worked out? And question to Adam, I was just curious if you could help us understand how your approach of sitting with the uncomfort would, how or if would work in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the gentleman there. Yes, please.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Edward. I'm at the University of Notre Dame, a student. My question is for Monsignor and for Rita. We've been speaking about grassroots, bottom-up approaches to integral human development, but I want to understand where bishops are in the equation, because they can support or they can discourage this kind of work. Depends on the agenda of the bishop, and at times can counter what the Holy See wants. So I'm wondering where the bishops are in terms of how to approach this the topic.
Thank you. Father here, the mic, please.
I'm the Abbot Primate of the Benedictines, the neighbor here. A question for Monsignor Pacho. I was very touched by the description of Sir Malcolm about what it means to change the conversation, how that really can actually be effective. Now, we have witnessed for the last, 15 years, how the Holy See has changed the conversation with China, which, of course, from a point of view of religious liberty is extremely important. I mean, would you accept that's what's actually been going on, the new paradigm of engaging with China with this confidential agreement and so on, that is actually precisely a way of using that methodology for finally achieving something when naming and shaming does not apparently produce results?
Thank you. Very interesting question. The last question there, and then I'll give the opportunity to Monsignor Pacho in particular to reply.
Thank you very much. My name is Muhammad from Cairo University. Thank you for the amazing conference, amazing talks, but I'm just wondering why the economic aspect of such integral human development approach seems the less important for all presentations, for all talks, seems somehow marginalized. Despite in the early beginning, I was expecting that this economic aspect of this approach will be the most crucial, the most central, because the argument is very simple. Religious freedom are hard to be achieved if people feel marginalized, if people suffer from poverty, they will be disappointed, sectarianism and discrimination will emerge and appear. Then economic reform, political reform are crucial aspects to achieve and preserve religious freedoms. That's why it's simply we need to more emphasis on economic reform, and to achieve economic reform, we need to change the common and the dominant economic developmental perspective, and we need to eliminate exploitation. We need to make people feel more empowered, and then I think many pathways can be, we can think about it, like cooperatives, like democracy at work. We need a political reform as well as economic reform also. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I can just abuse my church position for a second, Monsignor Pacho. The new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, of course, is also an American citizen. And so the issue of religious freedom is part, I'm sure, of is the way in which it's been brought up, the First Amendment. Do we need to expect, are you working, helping him in making any new intervention in this area of religious freedom? Can you give us any breaking news about that?
So also,
yes.
Also you might think that my name, Daniel, is indicating capacity of prophecy. I'm not able to answer to your question.
Okay.
Nevertheless, we know the Holy Father, the Pope, is always the successor of Peter. And so we believe that in his conscience, in his prayers, he tries to figure out what God is willing to tell today in our societies, with our needs, with our challenges. And we agree all on the fact that freedom of religion and belief is an issue in our societies. So I think without becoming a prophet, it will be part of the agenda the Holy See always has and had. Perhaps I come back to the other questions.
Of course,
and,
yes. You can answer the other question that were posed to you. Yes, of course.
To Father Abbot. Well, thanks to God, the question of China is not in my dossier, so I can't answer to that. But I would not speak about a big change. The policy of the Holy See, Ostpolitik, was always to interact with every player who is willing to interact with the Holy See. Looking for compromise, talking with each other, tolerating each other, trying to have a dialogue, a structured dialogue. So I would not see a change of policy, of the way the Holy See is interacting with other countries, with other global players. And to the first question, the role of bishop was mentioned. Perhaps just a word theologically, a bishop is not responsible to the Pope in the sense of an CEO. Every bishop is responsible to God. He has a certain autonomy how to live his ministry as a bishop in his local church. Nevertheless, we have some political guidelines, let's say, and we hope that the bishops follow these guidelines and are useful and helpful to mobilize and to promote and to encourage grassroots movements in the church, within their local churches and communities, to promote freedom of religion and belief, dialogue with other religions, and promote integral human development.
Monsignor Pacho, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Monsignor Pacho for his participation.
Thank you so much. Sorry that I have to listen. Thank you.
Yes. And we entrust you a copy of our report.
About the dialogue in the UN.
We'll entrust you a copy of our report for Pope Leo XIV. Please,
thank you very much.
Pastor.
Goodbye.
Okay, I think we want to take some other questions to continue the conversation. I think there was One question here as well, and then, yes. Yes, Sheikh Lemu here.
One important part of integral human development is this respect and acceptance of the other. Something we notice in interreligious dialogue is a healthy competition. When one community does something good to the other, another one feels a bit guilty, we didn't do, or would like to say we also did. The idea behind and this is about 60 years now, the Nostra Aetate, of accepting the other and the Church of God outside the church, so to speak, as some would put it, I think is one of those teachings that evokes the inclusive theology that other religions have. So you would find within Islam, within Judaism, a couple of other religions, you do have the more exclusive trend, and you have the more inclusive and the more towards the pluralistic respect for others. I think the Nostra document and its central teachings could inspire many other communities to take that type of a bold step. The Catholic Church went through a lot. I mean, it was very heroic at that time, 60 years ago, for the Pope and the Church to take that type of stance. But when I try to ask Catholics, for Muslims, do you know anything about the Nostra Aetate? In fact, I have Catholic extended family members, and I told them I was being invited to talk at this, and I just said, you know, what do you know about the Nostra, and kind of who's that? And I said, no, it's a document of Vatican II. They knew nothing about it. I asked one of the Catholic leaders in the community, approximately what % of Catholics know about the document, and he said probably 3%. I can understand why even today some communities within Nigeria or anywhere else would find it difficult to push those as mainstream teachings. But since the Catholic Church has made that step, my question would have gone to Monsignor, but I think more food for thought, and what your thoughts are, how could that type of document be pushed forward to encourage other communities to come up with their own versions of the respect for the other and the acceptance for the other in a formal way by mainstream?
Thank you, Sheikh Lemu. I just want to mention, very soon I think we are going to celebrate the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate. I know that preparations are for conferences, but I think this is an extremely interesting point. Imam Pallavicini, then.
Thank you very much, Professor Petito, and thanks to all the panelists for this such an interesting occasion and on a very sensitive topic. My question is addressed to Professor Adam Seligman, if I may say, because I was very interested in, if I may say, two key words of your answers. One was the identity crisis, if I may. I mean, you spoke about identity, and the second one was, of course, is your management of diversities of differences. My approach would be, if one has to find or the changement in the narrative, I think that the issue of managing differences is quite a delicate and important challenge, because as you mentioned, even in terms of tolerating differences, one has always his own interpretation of a different interlocutor. And either, at least in Italy, I see that either he is too much different or he is not as much different as I expect he should be. And this is really, I think it's going into what I would call a polytheistic confusion of interpretations and mismanagement of diversity. But the solution could be, according to my education, to go back to the roots of what is the source of identity. And spiritually speaking, of every religious community, I think the forgetting our divine, holy, sacred identity will not allow us to have a vision on management of diversity in humanity. So the idea is that these challenges or managing these debates among religious leaders, implementing some inspiration in social challenges must start by recognizing a common principle, a common spiritual identity, a holy identity that is not an exclusive identity, but is something that is shared with different grammars by believers of one God. And this could be a starting new paradigm of a debate, even in terms of managing crisis.
Thank you, Imam Pallavicini. I think there was a question.
You're expecting us to remember a lot if you're still asking questions.
I know, but I want to go. There is a lot of questions. I collect two more, and then I'll pass you and give you the opportunity to reply. The gentleman over there.
Yes. My name is Paul Fine. I study at Oxford University. Question for Professor Petito. In the 1950s, much of this same rhetoric, almost to the word, was being used by the Eisenhower administration to combat global communism. We have freedom, we have dignity, we have democracy because we are made in the image of God and we believe in the deathless dignity of the human being. Many have assessed that and said not only did it lead to the erosion of the traditional religions in the United States, but it also strangely gave way to the rise of being spiritual but not religious that we all see around us today. I wonder, given the similarities, is there any concern that something similar could potentially happen in that the religions we all cherish so deeply could, in a sense, lose their distinctiveness, and that it could lead to places we may not expect them to? Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, there is even more. Nicoletta, okay, questions, and then we'll close. We'll go back for the final round of questions. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentations. I was just contemplating again the title while listening your presentation, and a thought came to me. The societal value of religious freedom, I see what we're trying to value here. I'm afraid we can lead to a utilitarian approach. Say, oh, religious freedom is good because of. While I really think we could think to religious freedom as an anthropological foundation of the human being, and there is no need to be any positive outcome of that. It's just a part of the human being. So that means religious freedom could be by itself, has a value in itself. It doesn't need to have, and actually we could reverse the approach, say, this is what we would call in Christian theology a cataphatic approach. It means what is positive about it. We could also reflect on what is negative when it's missing, because we spoke about a little bit this, but let's have a really developed approach on that, because this will kind of raise our sensitivity a little bit more. What we lose as human beings speaking from an ontological point of view, anthropologic point of view, if we don't have religious freedom, regardless of what is it? Thank you.
Thank you, Nicoletta. So I think we have a couple of minutes each. I want to first turn to Mohammed because I think I owe you a little bit more time from the previous round. Mohammed, there were many different questions, especially also from Imam Lemu, Imam Pallavicini. Selectively engage with what you think.
Well, thank you for giving me that opportunity, the freedom to select.
Yes.
From all of these questions. So this is a freedom that I appreciate. I want to leave you with a couple of things. One is that Imam Lemo mentioned Nusrat Ate and the anniversary is coming up. This brings me to the importance of the assets that we have as religious communities, what they call it assets, theological documents that we have to advance religious freedom. These documents are yet to be utilized. We need to use the document. We need to go back to our tradition and look into these documents. Let me show hands here. How many people in this room heard about the Marrakesh Declaration? Just show hand, all right? So we see maybe 10 people in the room of 50 people. This is the most dynamic theological documents that came from the Muslim communities to advance religious freedom based on 1400 years ago when Prophet Muhammad actually produced the Constitution of Medina. So Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, whose son is here with us, His Excellency, the Secretary General is here, Sheikhna, is the one when he looked into the situation of the Muslim world, he looked into, there is a conversation about religious freedom. There is a conversation about violent extremism. There is a conversation about, terrorism. He went back to the essential theological documents, the Medina Charter, and came up with the Marrakesh Declarations. We were so happy to get the opportunity actually to present it to the late Holy Father. So these are educations as well, Nuruddin Lemo. If today in Nigeria you ask how many Muslims actually scholars know about the Marrakesh Declaration, how many? I see that you are nodding your head. So it's going to be
one. We have it here.
So there is a work need to be done. That brings me to the final point I want to make and leave you with, and that is related to what role prominent religious leaders like the Holy Father, the Pope, or Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya can do to advance religious freedom, or can do to actually advance the integral human development. Another example, and you know my classic story, when the Holy Father, Pope Francis, the late Pope Francis, decided to visit Central African Republic. How many of you remember that? Majority of the room, for you, that's a famous visit. The international community, the multilateralism, meaning that the MONUSCO, the United Nations, the French troops in the ground, they told him, don't come. It's a dangerous place. In 2014, there was a war between Anti-Balaka and Selika. Again, we were on the ground. Before that, Sheikhna was with me. We saw bodies on the street, right? But the Holy Father decided to go. He has a mission. What was the mission? The mission is to advance religious freedom, interreligious collaboration, social cohesion, supporting the poor community in Central African Republic. Now, he decided to go against the international community, dangerous place. But guess what? Someone was able to attain ceasefire for 24 hours, negotiated, an insider mediator woman, insider mediator woman was able to attain ceasefire for 24 hours. She talked to the Anti-Balaka and the Selika, they stopped fighting. The Holy Father visited Bangui, met with the communities. Now, he did something more. What was it? He said, I want to visit the Muslim community, the most dangerous place in the city. PK5, call it. How is that going to happen? He said, no, I want to go there. I want to see Imam Ahmed al-Tijani, the head of the Muslim community in the central mosque in Bangui. And he decided to go there. He went to the mosque, met with Imam Ahmed, with 10th of Imams, they were there, and he took Imam Ahmed in his own car and visited the poor communities in the next door refugees in a school. And from there, the Holy Father said what? Faith over fear, all right? Today, when you go Central African Republic, he is well known in the Muslim communities. He contributed to advancement of religious freedom and empowering the numerical minority Muslim communities in the country. And I say numerical minorities because the dynamic of this majority minority, if you are majority somewhere, you are minority somewhere else. So just minority in numbers. So there is a role for religious actors prominent to play. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sir Malcolm.
Thank you. I've reached that point in life where the idea of choice is frightening. You know, I'd rather be told what to do and do it, and people either. And so, having to choose some questions, there were a couple that perhaps were stood out or were slightly addressed to me. So, perhaps there was one about the description of, if you like, confidentiality, about visiting, you know, and engaging with people who you had been investigating for atrocities. And perhaps I should clarify, that is what we did not do and did not do by design. You know, we never presented ourselves as choosing to go to a country in order to investigate a specific allegation. Because if you do that, you run right into that sort of brick wall that you suggest. And in a sense, it wasn't our mandate. With the greatest of respect to my great friend, you know, Zealand and all the UN special rapporteurs, you know, who I know, everybody knows that if they choose to go to a country, it's going to lead to a report that is going to be roughly critical. And that is, you know, quite often the way of it, and that's sort of for what they do, that's fine. But if we were trying to construct a different sort of engagement, if we only went to countries because it was visible that we thought there was a real problem that we wanted to look into, you had defeated yourself before you started, which is why the entire framing around it, and language, of course, is important, is that we were going, and our mandate was to enhance the guarantees for prevention of ill treatment. And so you presented yourself as someone not coming as an investigator and a judge, as too many in the human rights world do, but people who were planning to go in to find out what the situation was and to place yourself alongside those in trying to make sure that bad things did not happen, working in partnership. Now, of course, there was always a degree of fiction to this. You would always choose to go with limited resources to places where you thought there was a problem and you thought you could make a difference. Both of those was important. Pointless going to places with people who you didn't think there was an opportunity to engage constructively with. Others can do it. So I think the point that underlies that is if one is going to work in a confidential way with people, you've got to do it in a way that isn't accusatory from the outset. Even if it is, should we say, inspired by such things, you have to choose how you present yourself to your interlocutors if you are going to make the progress that you wish. Another one briefly to pick up upon from a different angle, you mentioned about the lack of economics in the discussion. I have to say, from my perspective, I absolutely get and agree completely with the idea that, should we say, where there is freedom of religion and belief, you will get better, you know, economic outcomes, more empowerment, more engagement within society, etc., and that is a good in itself. I suppose I've always been a bit hesitant about positing that as the reason why you do it. I would see it as a hugely beneficial and predictable product of it, but one reason why I backtrack a little on that is I don't think the arguments for supporting religious freedom are primarily economic, although I absolutely get that this will have that empowerment and elevating potential, which brings me briefly to that sort of final point is, well, why do we do it at all? which is a bit of a strange one to ask because we spend all our life talking about it. But, there is a great English novelist, Anthony Trollope, one of my heroes, and there was one of his famous novels where some young people were telling the older cleric, we must do something about this, we must do something. He said, must we? Why? There is an answer to that question, and I was once asked the daftest question I think I've ever been asked to address at a conference, so I did my best, was, quote, whether God believes in human rights, to which I simply answered, A, I didn't know, and B, wouldn't presume to have an opinion. In a sense, that is for others to do, but that isn't why we are interested in human rights, because it's fulfilling what God does. It's the way in which I think that we understand the importance of religion and belief to us. And it is that, and we've always seen how, sometimes problematically, religious believers have been very keen to intervene to support co-religionists under pressure in other countries. But the idea that something that we recognize is so important to us is something that everyone should enjoy and should be made available to everyone, even if they are not of our faiths or of our traditions. That is something that I think is hugely important that we do, because in ourselves we recognize the empowerment that brings to us. Let us call it integral human development. And our mission, therefore, in promoting religious liberty is to bring that benefit to everyone. And I think that is the reason why we should be doing it.
Thank you. Adam, and then Rita.
Okay,
yes.
So first I'll speak for the absent Monsignor. Sheikh Nuruddin asked how other communities can learn from Nostra Aetate or develop. We must not forget that following Nostra Aetate, there was a huge amount of work done that had to be done on the local level within the worldwide Catholic community about teaching, about school books, about how to teach Catholic children history, the history of religions in Europe, for instance. So there was a huge amount of work done at that local level that we're talking about. Had it just remained, nothing would have happened. So that's also to remind all of us that proclamations are important, but what really changes is what's done on the ground. That's one. I want to go back to the very first question about discomfort in Israel-Palestine. I want to say two things. First, the only rule that the program that I've been running for 25 years has is that there's no monopoly on suffering. No group has a monopoly on suffering. People come to the program, Jews, Palestinians, American blacks, Africans, gays, women, you name it. Everybody has their baggage. Everybody feels that they in their group are the cosmic victims. And of course, if I feel that, when I meet you, I see you only through those lenses. That is, I don't see you. I see only the moral claims that I'm making on you. And the whole point is to see the other, interact with the other, not through my preconceived assumptions. So to try to put a bracket around that, that's one. Now let me answer your question, or tell a story. I lived in Israel 50 years ago. 50 years ago, except for a handful, maybe a few thousand at most, of Israeli Jews, everybody denied the expulsion of the Palestinians in 48, or told this story about the Arabs told them to leave. Everybody denied it, and of course denied what happened in 68. And of course denied what happened in 68 as well. They denied it because having to live with it would be a problem, all right? What's happened in 50 years, let's say before October 7th, is even worse. Now people say, yeah, it happened and it had to happen. In both cases, not willing to be uncomfortable, not being first iteration, we're not uncomfortable because it never happened, so there's nothing to be uncomfortable about. It was just a war and so on, people ran away, and what can you do? In the second iteration, more recent, yeah, it happened. Serves them right. That's what happens. What is. So in both cases, and I'm just talking about from the Israeli Jewish point of view, there's an unwillingness to live in discomfort. Now go back for a minute to the first thing I said about no monopoly on suffering. What you have there are two people totally ensconced within their suffering, within their national, which means also very personal, traumatic narratives. So the first step is going to be very uncomfortable to recognize, as you said, the other's pain, let alone the other's legitimacy. I could tell many stories, but we don't have time.
We don't have
so
time.
I won't. But you see my point. So I think that it's critical to move anywhere in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The first critical step is being willing to be uncomfortable. And the attempts, very, very small now, of the movement called A Land for Everybody, right? Which is, again, an attempt at something like a binational state. It keeps not falling apart, but unraveling because of the problem of trust, which is understandable. And again, the only way forward is for each one to have enough trust, to build the frameworks for enough trust to be uncomfortable, to begin to really talk. Finally, I don't think we have a sacred identity. I think we have sacred obligations. Or rather, I think we have obligations to the transcendent realm, which is very different from sacred identity. And this would take us again to what Scott and I talked about a little bit about dignity, which is given in Catholicism, rooted in imitatio Deo. Read what most of you people call the Old Testament. The only notion of imitatio Deo, which is Tselem Elokim, the image of God, the only time it appears is in taking down a criminal who's been hanged before nightfall. Doesn't have the vast ontological meanings that it has in Catholicism. So it's not clear if we go deeply, we use the same words, if we go deeply, how much is really shared. And I think, again, I talked earlier about categories and not translating yours into mine, but doing the work of recognizing we're really talking about different things. And now what do we do?
Thank you, Adam. And Rita, you will. I want to call.
Una frase.
Yes. One
no, I want only to remember the responsibility of each one of us to be builders of peace. Because without peace, there is no human development, there is no freedom, religious freedom. So, and it's the responsibility of each one of us.
Thank you very much,
And I agree.
Rita. Now, we are expecting a very short concluding remark from Professor Scott Appleby, which is looking at me and saying, no, I don't. But you have 2 minutes, please. You have been one of the major conspirators. You have been blaming myself all day for all the mistakes, so I couldn't. No, I'm joking. We are delighted.
I'll be blaming you a lot more later. I'm going to be as quick as possible. I was given 30 minutes, so I'm going to try to, I'm going to do this quickly. I'm going to try to do these paragraphs in about 3 or 4 minutes. I'll be the first one to go a little bit over time today. I just have to start by saying, Paul Fine mentioned President Eisenhower's views on religion. You should know that President Eisenhower said emphatically, everyone should have a religion, and I don't care what it is. There's a whole story in that about religious pluralism. Okay, how do we make summary of this evening and today in a few paragraphs, more than a few? IHD, we're a people of acronyms, Integral Human Development, poses to FORB, freedom of religion or belief campaign two provocative questions. Is peace, stability, and human flourishing possible without a robust recognition of human dignity? And second, what does human dignity require? There, as Adam just mentioned, there are various views on human dignity. The Catholic view is that human dignity is inherent in simply being human. No state gives it or takes it away. It's there. Our responsibility is to create social, political, economic conditions commensurate to a dignity that already exists. But there are various views on what dignity is, so we begin there, not just one. Whatever we say about dignity, it requires recognition, I would propose, of what one holds to be her deepest self, the inalienable core of her personhood, what remains when everything else is seared away, ethnicity, tribe, family, even religion, if the religion does not name this inner core of the person, does not resonate with it. Theists might use the language of transcendence. We've heard that today for those of you who've been with us all day. In any case, we understand freedom of religion and belief as the right to believe in God in one's own way or not at all. It is not so simple to address this question and to say, give it to the religions to solve, as religions in a given setting or context may not prioritize the dignity of each person, that liberal notion of the individual. Religions may not prioritize that. Many do not. Instead, they prioritize the value of the community. Many do. That may supersede the dignity of the individual, and herein lies problems. And then there is the public order, which has a say in freedom of religion, belief, integral human development. As it were, regarding dignity, the public order has a say. The state in particular has a role in the dignity and freedom debate as politicians and officials negotiate pressures that are internal, for example, from competing domestic interests, as they are pressed by a cacophony of voices and constituents, or a deeper internal pressure from their own personal political ambitions. They're also pressed by external pressure from other states or international agencies and putatively regulatory bodies. So politicians, the public order, has its own set of priorities and imperatives that don't always mesh well with those of the religious. In addition to understanding dignity as accruing to community rather than to the individual, religions themselves are hotbeds of internal contestation. Always, religion is an interpretive exercise. When we're dealing with the sacred, with the non-material, with the spiritual, the rule is interpretive. What do these traditions and doctrines and rituals mean? It's an interpretive exercise, always contested, and can therefore be easily manipulated by political, economic, or religious actors, provoking multiple and contradictory responses to the very same scriptures, doctrines, and rituals. So how do we move forward? This means I'm coming to a conclusion, you'll be glad to know. How do we move forward? We've heard a lot today and this evening about focusing on the local, the priority of the local. And it's tempting to sacralize the local, the people, who, by virtue of being local, are not immune from the sins of envy, pride, fear, and violence to which all human beings are susceptible, perhaps especially when they are insufficiently attentive to the ethical imperatives of their own dignity. The people sometimes suffer from what Olivier Roy has termed holy ignorance, including of their own religious tradition and community, making them susceptible even more so to manipulation by outside actors. So we got to be careful not to go too far in saying the local and the people are always the answer at every case. All that said, the problems begin with the local and in the local, and so too does much of the wisdom of lived religion. Lived religion is what happens in the local community. It's not abstract. It's not what we scholars do. It's not what debaters outside the community. Lived religion is in the local community, with our concerns or caveats about valorizing too much the local. The problems begin with the local, so does the wisdom of lived religion. That wisdom includes an instinct, I believe, at the local level in most of these religious traditions, what a word, most, to be open to building bridges, not walls, to be open to building what today we call a culture of encounter with the other. At the local level, at its best, there is an openness. If religion is allowed to be internally contested, but move forward in a complicated setting to build or to be open to a culture of encounter that could be productive. Yes, there are legal, however constrained, Sir Malcolm, and political and institutional religious dimensions of advancing freedom of religion and belief through integral human development. But in the end, there is no substitute, I think, for building respect for human dignity from the ground up, deriving it from the ground up. So, I had a quick, wonderful conversation at lunch with Archbishop Machado, who was telling me about his more recent trip to Cambodia for Buddhist-Catholic dialogue. And I asked him, what is the takeaway from these interreligious dialogues? Because he is one of the most experienced people, certainly in the Catholic Church and in the world, in interreligious dialogue. What do we hope to gain? And his simple, elegant, profound answer was face-to-face relationships that we didn't have before. These are so important. When the crisis comes, the Buddhists don't know the Catholic bishop and doesn't know the head of the community or the imam or whoever it may be, there's no hope. Without these face-to-face, local, cross-border relationships at the local level, we can forget about deepening an awareness of human dignity that extends beyond the most narrowly self-interested view of religious freedom. Building relationships, we've learned long ago, is the very essence of peace building. It sounds simple, but you don't build peace without building relationships that are face-to-face, one-on-one. Seeing relationship building as the essence of deep freedom may require an act of creativity and imagination. The good news, so to speak, is that the religious imagination is rich and enduring. It will take further development of the secular imagination, perhaps, to let the religions be themselves at the risk and the hope that they will be their best selves. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. And with this, let me thank again the Atlantic Council, the Order of Malta, and let me also thank very much our panelists for a very interesting conversation. Thank you very much. And we are all invited for dinner, I understand, in the wonderful garden of this villa. Thank you. See you. Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you.